Ryan's office revenge. She didn't even look embarrassed when she said it. "You're burned out," my boss told me, like she was reading from a script someone in HR had handed her. Market dynamics are different now. If you can't adapt, you might need to think about whether this is still the right place for you. That was the official line. We were sitting in a small glass-walled meeting room on the 19th floor. Outside the window, the city was a blur of gray. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed, revealing every scratch on the cheap laminate table between us. On that table lay 2 pieces of paper. One was my updated compensation letter, a 3% cost of living increase after 22 years with the company. The other was the leaked screenshot of the new hires offer, printed in color because that made the insult somehow more tangible. Same role title as mine, same job description, same team. 3 times my salary. My name is Michael Brooks. I'm 48 years old. And that morning, sitting across from my boss while she explained why I was worth exactly 1/3 of someone who hadn't yet memorized the Wi-Fi password, something in me finally went quiet. Not snapped. Quiet. "Triple my salary," I said, tapping the printed screenshot lightly. "Same title, same responsibilities, same team. She's newer, so she gets more. She has different market value," my boss Amanda replied, folding her hands like a mediator. "You've been here over 2 decades. You have stability. She left a high-paying role at an investment bank. We had to compete to get her." "And to keep me," I asked, "you had to do what exactly?" Amanda's jaw tightened. "You have to look at total compensation in context. You've grown up inside this organization. You understand our systems, our processes. You don't need the same incentives as someone we're pulling in from outside." "You mean," I said, "you don't have to pay me as much because you're betting I won't leave?" She exhaled through her nose. "Michael, you're taking this the wrong way. This isn't personal. It's business. You've been stretched thin for years. You're always on, always the one here late. Frankly, you look tired. We need fresh energy. People who can handle the pace the next 3 years are going to demand. And I can't?" "You're burned out," she said, not unkindly. "Which is understandable, but we're heading into a merger. The combined entity is going to be brutal from a workload perspective. She's 28. She can handle it. She hesitated. "You might be happier with a steadier environment. Like I was a piece of legacy software they planned to sunset once the new platform was live." "Adapt or leave," she repeated softly. "Those are your options." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for being clear." She relaxed a little, mistaking my calm for acceptance. "Good. Take a few days to process. We'll support you either way." I reached into my folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, placed it on the table between us. It wasn't the compensation letter. It was my resignation. Already printed. Already dated. Already signed. "I don't need a few days," I said. "I've already chosen one of the options." Her eyes flicked down to the page. They moved faster as she registered the words. "Formal resignation. Effective 9:30 a.m. today." Her face drained half a shade. "Michael, let's not be hasty. We're 3 hours out from the merger presentation. We need you to finalize the numbers." "The numbers are finalized," I said. "They've been finalized for 3 days. You just haven't bothered to ask where they live." She straightened. "Regardless, you can't just walk out on a day like this. It will look terrible for you." "I'm aware of how it looks," I said. "I'm also aware of how it looks to pay someone triple my salary to do the same job and then justify it by calling me burned out. Be reasonable," she insisted, pushing the resignation letter back across the table. "Take the weekend. I'll see what we can do on equity, on title, on—" "No," I said, sliding it back. "You've made it very clear what my ceiling is here. I believe you." I stood up. Effective 9:30 a.m., I'm no longer an employee. It will have my access disabled within the hour. HR can process the paperwork. Michael, this is career suicide, she said, voice sharp now. You're walking away right before a merger. You'll never get a reference at your level again. No one hires someone who bails at the critical moment. I shrugged. At 9:29, I was an exhausted, underpaid senior director who knew your numbers better than you did. At 9:31, I'll be the only person outside the C-suite who actually understands how this merger model works and doesn't work. I'm pretty sure someone will hire me. She stared at me, realization slowly dawning. What do you mean, the only person? I glanced at the digital clock on the wall. 9:27 a.m. You should probably call the COO, I said. He'll want to know why the only finished version of the integration model is on a personal laptop that's leaving the building in 3 minutes. Her composure cracked. This isn't funny. I'm not joking, I replied. Your internal team has versions, but the reconciled model that actually balances, the one you're supposed to present to the acquirer's board at noon, that's on my machine with my notes, which I was planning to walk you through at 10 a.m., until I learned I'm worth 1/3 of a 28-year-old who hasn't shipped a deliverable yet. At 9:30 a.m., I handed my badge to the guard. By 9:32 a.m., my email access was disabled. By 9:40 a.m., my corporate messaging app logged me out. By 11 a.m., my phone showed 23 missed calls. By noon, the COO was on my doorstep, sweat bleeding through his dress shirt, knocking like his life depended on it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To explain how a quiet, underpaid finance director became the most expensive missing asset in his company's history by simply walking away, I have to take you back. Not to the merger, not to the leaked offer. Back to the years when being low maintenance and reliable sounded like compliments. My name is Michael Brooks. I'm 48 years old. And until 9:30 a.m. this morning, I was Senior Financial Systems Director at a company called Langley Consumer Holdings. Unofficially, I was the person everyone called when the numbers didn't make sense, and the clock was already ticking. I didn't come up through investment banking. No blue-chip consulting firms on my resume. No Ivy League crest on my wall. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Ohio, went to a state university nobody outside the region can pronounce properly, and graduated with a finance degree and a minor in information systems. Because the advisor told me, if you can understand both the numbers and the software, you'll always have a job. Turned out he was right, just not in the way I expected. Before I ever touched a corporate budgeting tool, I spent 4 years doing something very different. I was a finance clerk for a logistics unit in the Army, which sounds glamorous until you realize it mostly meant reconciling fuel receipts and making sure the right numbers showed up in the right boxes, so trucks kept moving and nobody got yelled at by someone with more stripes. I learned some things there that never show up in MBA case studies, like how one missing line item can halt an entire convoy, how reality doesn't care about your forecast, and how systems fail in ways that are always traceable if you know where to look. When I got out, civilian employers didn't know what to do with a sergeant who could balance a battalion's operating budget on a laptop that barely booted. So I did what a lot of vets do. I started at the bottom. Junior analyst at a regional distribution company, then a step up at a retail chain. Then 22 years ago, I landed at Langley. Back then, Langley wasn't the diversified consumer portfolio it would later claim to be in investor presentations. It was a messy collection of mid-tier brands, snacks, personal care, household goods, that had been stitched together through cheap acquisitions. Someone in private equity had looked at a map, connected dots between companies with similar distribution channels, and thought, if we jam these together, we can cut costs and boost multiples. They weren't entirely wrong. They just forgot that after you jam things together, Someone has to make the numbers make sense. That someone was me. I joined as a financial systems analyst, a title broad enough to mean do whatever we don't know how to do. What that translated to day to day was this: migrate 3 different ERP systems into one. Rebuild reporting so the board could see consolidated results instead of 20 Excel files emailed at 2 a.m. Translate what operations meant by we're screwed into a variance analysis that didn't panic investors. On paper, I was mid-level. In practice, I was the bridge between the messy reality on the warehouse floor and the neat story in the quarterly deck. The first time I realized how invisible that bridge was came during year 2. We were closing Q4. The numbers weren't adding up. Revenue looked fine. Cash didn't. A $12 million gap between what we'd invoiced and what had actually landed. I spent 3 nights tracing it. Turned out a newly acquired subsidiary had a creative invoicing workflow that booked revenue when orders were printed, not shipped. Boxes sitting in the warehouse had been booked as sales. Nothing illegal, just aggressively optimistic. When I presented the reconciliation to the controller, he frowned. "This is going to wreck our quarter." "No," I said. "This is our quarter. It was wrecked before we looked at it." He sighed. "You have to understand, the CFO's been promising the board we'd hit a clean $500 million this year. If we adjust for this, we'll miss." "So you want to lie?" He flinched. "Of course not. We'll disclose, but the timing of how we disclose matters." We went back and forth. Eventually, the CFO agreed to restate. The board was not pleased. Our stock took a small hit. Behind closed doors, people grumbled about systems issues and unexpected adjustments. Nobody mentioned the analyst who'd refused to smooth it over. I wasn't looking for credit, but I learned something important. When the numbers go your way, it's leadership. When they don't, it's systems. And the people who fix the systems, they're support. Replaceable. Interchangeable. Until they're not. Over the next 2 decades, my job evolved. Not because my title changed much. It did, slowly, analyst to senior analyst to director. But because of what people expected from me. I became the guy people called when the CEO wanted a new way to slice profitability by channel that didn't exist in any current report. When a brand GM needed to defend her segment's performance and couldn't figure out why the margin math looked wrong. When the auditors had questions about revenue recognition, and there was no one else who understood both the accounting policy and the reporting engine. I learned our systems better than the vendor did. I learned our brands better than some of the marketing directors. I knew where data moved, where it stalled, where it went to die. Every time we acquired a new company, I was on the front lines of the integration, mapping their chart of accounts to ours, untangling their inventory logic, explaining to their shell-shocked finance team that yes, they were now expected to close the books in 4 days instead of 10. I wasn't a hero. I was just reliable. Problem is, in corporate culture, reliable often morphs into taken for granted. At home, life tracked a different kind of spreadsheet. My wife Lisa and I had 2 kids, Ashley and Jordan. We bought a townhouse in a suburb just far enough from the office that I could pretend I had separation between work and home. I didn't. There was always a laptop open on the kitchen table. Always one more query to run. Always a deck to tweak before morning. I missed things. School plays, parent-teacher conferences, Ashley's first debate tournament, Jordan's robotics competition. I tried to compensate. Saturday morning pancakes, big family trips once a year, overpriced birthday gifts. Lisa tolerated it for a long time. "You're doing this for us," she'd say. I believed that until the night she didn't say it anymore. It was the week before a major acquisition close. I was working past midnight. Spreadsheets, models, integration timelines. Lisa came into the living room, arms crossed. "The kids went to bed an hour ago," she said. "You didn't say goodnight." "I'll make it up to them," I said. "Once this deal is done, things will calm down." "You've been saying that for 6 years," she replied. We argued. Not about the numbers, about everything they represented. "You choose them every time," she said finally. "The deals, the models, the executives, you show up for them. You don't show up for us." "I'm doing this for us," I repeated, weaker this time. She shook her head. "No. You're doing this because somewhere along the line you decided that being indispensable to them mattered more than being present here. We stayed together. We didn't quite break, but a small essential trust cracked that night. I told myself I'd fix it after the next quarter, then after the next acquisition, then after the next system migration. You can guess how that went. Inside Langley, things were changing too. New investors, new executives, new buzzwords, digital transformation, omni-channel synergy, consumer 360. Beneath the jargon, the strategy was simple. Cut costs, grow EBITDA, sell or merge at a higher multiple. We all knew an exit of some sort was coming. We just didn't know when or with whom. Until 6 months ago, when rumors of a merger started. Not the usual, we're always exploring strategic options. Real whispers, names, numbers. The CFO pulled me into his office one afternoon. "We might be entering discussions with Vanguard Consumer Group," he said, closing the door. "This is highly confidential. If it happens, we'll need a full integration model. Pro forma combined P&L, balance sheet. Cash, flows, synergy case. The works." "Who's on it?" I asked. "You," he said. "You and FP&A, obviously, but you'll own the core model. You're the only one who understands how all our segments really roll up." I nodded because that was true. We kicked off the work under code names. Project North Star, strict need-to-know lists, late nights, weekend sessions, dozens of iterations. The bankers had their version. We had ours. Mine was the one that actually tied back to both sets of audited financials. I knew where every assumption lived, where every lever hid, what could move, what couldn't, which synergy opportunities were real and which were wishful thinking. Leadership leaned on the wishful thinking. I made sure the numbers still added up, at least on my copy. In the midst of all this, Langley launched something they were very proud of: the Next Gen Finance Leadership Program. Designed, according to the internal memo, to attract world-class talent capable of driving our transformation in a rapidly evolving consumer landscape. Translation: expensive hires from big-name schools. One of them was a woman named Jessica Palmer, 28 years old, Harvard MBA. 2 years at a top-tier consulting firm where she'd done consumer packaged goods strategy and operating model redesigns. She was sharp, confident, excellent in a room. Knew how to structure a slide, ask the right broad questions, and say lean into without flinching. They hired her as Senior Finance Manager, Strategic Initiatives. Within 3 months, she was embedded with us to get hands-on experience with core financial systems ahead of the merger. She was also, as I learned one unfortunate evening through a forwarded screenshot, making $240,000 base salary. Triple mine. I didn't go looking for that information. It landed in the finance team group chat. Someone on Jessica's old consulting team had shared her new CompFlex post. She'd posted a picture of a celebratory drink with the caption, "Excited to be joining Langley Consumer Holdings as Senior Finance Manager." total package finally reflects my value. Shout out to all the women negotiating hard for what they're worth. Harvard MBA, know your worth. The numbers weren't blurred. Someone did the math. It took about 14 seconds before someone else said, "Wait, isn't that more than triple what most of us make?" The chat went quiet after that. But quiet doesn't mean forgotten. I stared at that screenshot for a long time that night. $240,000. My base was $80,000. Same title level, same team, same work. The only difference was 22 years of experience versus 2 years of consulting. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Amanda. I printed out the screenshot. I brought my last 3 performance reviews. All exceeds expectations. I brought documentation of the merger model progress, the systems integrations I'd led, the crisis situations I'd resolved. I thought I was being reasonable. I thought 22 years of proven results would count for something. I thought asking for market rate after seeing what market rate actually was would be a simple conversation. 3 days later, I was in that glass meeting room being asked to understand market dynamics. "Jessica brings a different profile," Amanda said. "Her previous comp sets her floor. If we want talent like that, we have to pay for it." "And me?" I asked. "What's my floor?" "You're already here," she said gently. "It's different." She meant, "You don't have leverage." That's when I realized something important. They weren't underpaying me because they couldn't afford more. They were underpaying me because they thought I wouldn't leave. Because I was burned out, a sunk cost, replaceable. That's what adapt or leave really meant. Adjust your expectations downward or we'll find someone shiny, who won't question theirs. So, I chose leave. Quietly, professionally, with a signed resignation letter and a fully reconciled merger model sitting on my laptop. Here's what no one in that building realized when Amanda pushed that line across the table. In systems like ours, leverage doesn't sit in titles. It sits in knowledge. Not generic, I worked here once knowledge. Specific, granular, unsexy knowledge. How Brand A's promotional spending actually flows through to margins. How Brand B's chargebacks are being misclassified. How Brand C's seasonality interacts with Vanguard's fiscal calendar. Which synergy assumptions are real and which will blow up post-close. I had all of that because for 22 years, every time something didn't add up, someone brought it to me. I didn't hoard it. I documented it. I automated what I could. I trained people. But that last integration model, the one undergirding the entire merger story, I'd been asked to keep that tight, need to know, too sensitive to spread around. Only a handful of people had seen it, and of those, only one had built it. Which is how at noon on the day of the merger presentation, I ended up with the COO on my doorstep. His name is Ryan Hayes. Late 50s, silver hair, tailored suits. The kind of man who'd spent his career in conference rooms convincing people he was in control. He did not look in control standing in the hallway outside my apartment, tie loosened, sweat soaking through his shirt. "Michael," he said as soon as I opened the door. "Thank God. We need to talk." I leaned against the doorframe. "I don't work for you anymore." "I don't care what HR paperwork says," he snapped. "Right now, we have 3 hours until we're in front of 2 boards and a room full of bankers. The integration model is incomplete. The segments don't reconcile. The EPS bridge doesn't tie. The auditors are already getting twitchy. We need the final numbers. Your numbers. They're complete," I said. "You just don't have them." His jaw clenched. "We've tried to reconstruct your logic. FP&A has been working non-stop. They can't make everything balance. There are adjustments in your version we don't understand. You need to walk us through it." "No," I said. He blinked. "Michael, be serious. I am serious. For 22 years, every time something didn't make sense, I fixed it quietly. For 22 years, you were fine with me being invisible as long as the numbers told the story you wanted. Yesterday, your organization told me exactly what I'm worth. 1/3 of someone who just got here. That was your decision. This is mine. This isn't the time for grudges," he said. "This is bigger than you. This merger affects thousands of employees, billions in market cap. And I warned you," I said, "about single points of failure, about knowledge concentration, about what happens when you treat experienced people like they're obsolete. I wrote the risk memos. I built the succession plans. They sat in a SharePoint folder no one opened because it didn't fit the narrative of, 'We can just hire MBAs and be fine.'" His tone shifted. "We'll pay you. Consulting fees. Name a number. You want triple your salary? Done. You want a retention bonus? Done. We'll backdate a promotion. Whatever it takes. Just come back, in for one day, and get us through this presentation." The old me would have said yes. Would have walked back in, saved the day, gone back to being reliable. The new hire would still make triple. The story wouldn't change. Only the timeline. "I don't want your money," I said quietly. "I wanted to be treated fairly before everything was on fire. You had years to do that. You decided not to. You told me I was burned out and replaceable. I'm finally taking you at your word. You're burning bridges you can't rebuild," he said. "No," I said. "I'm watching the bridge you built collapse under the weight of its own arrogance. I didn't design that. I just refuse to stand under it today." He stared at me for a long moment. "Is this really how you want to be remembered here? As the guy who turned their 60% discount into a full-price bill?" "Maybe." He swore under his breath. "You realize if these numbers don't add up in that room, this whole deal could fall apart. The acquirer walks, our stock tanks, there will be layoffs. Real people will suffer." I felt that deep down because I wasn't vindictive. I knew the downstream impact. I also knew something else. If your entire merger thesis depends on one underpaid director smoothing the numbers, I said, it's not a solid deal. It's a story held together with duct tape and habit. If that falls apart because I'm not there to patch it today, that's not on me. That's on whoever thought I was optional. He didn't have an answer for that. There wasn't one. After a moment, he stepped back. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," I said. "But if I am, it's mine for once." He left. I closed the door and waited. The merger presentation that afternoon did not go smoothly. Slides that didn't match the speaking points. EAPS accretion figures that contradicted earlier drafts. Follow-up questions from the acquirer's CFO that the Langley team couldn't answer because the only person who understood where the adjustments lived wasn't in the room. By the end of the day, the deal wasn't dead, but it was bleeding. Extended diligence, additional verification required, revised timeline. Within a week, Langley's board formed a special review committee to understand how such a critical model ended up dependent on one person. They found my repeated documentation of systems risks, my proposals for cross-training, my flagged tickets about knowledge concentration. All filed, all acknowledged, all deprioritized. I got calls, not from Langley, from the acquirer. "We don't trust Langley's numbers anymore," their CFO told me. "We need someone who actually knows how their financial systems work." I answered questions honestly. Where the synergies were real, where they were exaggerated, where the integration risks lay. At the end, he said, "We'd like to hire you. VP of Integration Finance. Better pay, better title, more support. A mandate to tell the truth, not polish it. I said yes, not out of spite, out of alignment. 6 months later, the merger closed on revised terms. Lower price, more protections for the acquirer. Langley's CEO retired. The CFO disappeared. Amanda left for new opportunities. Jessica stayed. She was good once she understood how the numbers actually worked. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table at 6:30 p.m., helping Jordan with his physics homework, while Ashley texted me photos from her first year at college. I wasn't checking my email every 5 minutes to see which fire needed putting out. At 9:30 a.m. that day, I finally accepted their assessment that I was burned out and replaceable. By noon, when the COO knocked on my door, they learned what my work was actually worth. The real lesson isn't about revenge. It's about recognizing your worth before someone else is forced to discover it the hard way. Sometimes walking away is the only way to teach people what they actually had. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is exactly what they tell you. Adapt to a place that values what you bring, or leave the place that doesn't.